A lot of it has to do with trauma experienced in battle or in deployment in a combat zone, which has been intensified in some unique ways. And it's important for us, I think, as a church and as Americans, to really begin to reflect on what is the human cost of war. Welcome, everyone, to our One Mission, One Movement podcast. I'm Steve Throckmorton. This is Wayman Ming, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you again, Steve. And this podcast is so important to us because it gives us a platform to be able to discuss the major issues that are facing the body of Christ today. Of course, our podcast revolves around the idea of pursuing His presence, contending for mission, and growing the church. And today we have a very powerful topic that we want to look at. Tell us more about it.
Well, we're talking about the unseen cost of war from an interview that I recently did with our military chaplain endorser, David Reynolds, and his comments there is a way that it was the first that really brought this issue to my attention, to our attention, and it was something that we felt like that in the wake of Afghanistan, this is really what we need to look at, the unseen cost of war, which means the unseen human cost of war. And so today we're going to be talking and focusing a spotlight upon the increasing rate over the last 20 years of suicide among our veterans and among our active service members. And a recent report's come out with some statistics that have been quite eye-opening.
Yeah, and of course we're not the experts, Steve, at all in this particular area, but we will be interviewing in the next couple of episodes Dr. Reynolds, as you mentioned, and then also our VA chaplain, Dr. Tammy Alfadili, and they will be really helping us in this podcast to address some of these issues. But today, we just want to spend some time talking about it. We want our listeners and viewers to kind of hear the heartbeat of why this is so important to us and the body of Christ today.
Yes. Well, here at the One Mission, One Movement podcast, we've been talking about this issue, but in our discussions of it, we felt like that was an opportunity for us to step back and say, okay, now what? And so for us, then it was to focus on that. And Dr. Reynolds helped us to focus in on that. And so we're not the experts, so I had to dig pretty deep, to do this. But I wanted to dive deeper into this issue. There's a recent study that's come out, and we'll be referencing it in our comments, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's a recent study that's dedicated to the last 20 years of war, and it's dedicated to one of the most, if not the most significant problem coming out of the global war on terror conflict, and that is the suicide rate increased during that time. So in the last 20 years, the statistics are staggering. And what it was is that 4 times as many veterans and active service members have died by suicide as have died in actual combat or deployed in a combat zone. And here's the numbers. 7,000, a little over 7,000 have died deployed in combat zones. Over 30,000 veterans and active service members have died by suicide in this 20-year period. And it's a statistic that's taken everyone except for those on the front line by surprise. And so this is what we want to focus on. We feel like that this is an area where we have to raise awareness, we have to be informed, and we have to get involved.
Well, I don't think we often recognize how our military personnel, our veterans, need to decompress after such a focused mission. When they're in active duty, when they're in war, oftentimes they have to suppress their own feelings for the mission that they're engaged in. But they're people too. They have to decompress. They have to be able to give attention to their own personal health and in many ways become unseen casualties of war when they return. And so this discussion is so important, because when they come back, it's not just their own family and friends that need to rally around them.
Yes.
Steve, I would say every Christ follower, every leader, every pastor, the community of faith really needs to understand how to minister to our veterans and those who have given their lives on the front lines for the sake of our country.
Yes, that's true. And my conversations with Chaplain El Fadili particularly, she talked about, which I thought was really important. She said, really, for military personnel, about a third to a half of their life is actually involved directly in military activities or with their job. So they still have families, as you said. They still have lives. They still have personal problems. They have a history before their enlistment. And so we really want to say, above all things, we cannot stereotype these people. These are individuals with individual stories, and so it's very important for us to listen to those. And so as I began to look into this, there's several causes, and no one knows there's no one particular cause, or there's no one single conglomerate of causes. There's several things. A lot of it has to do with trauma experienced in battle, or in deployment in a combat zone, which has been intensified in some unique ways in the Gulf Wars. And so, and then PTSD plays a role into that, as well as the psychological toll that's taken on these. And it's important for us, I think, as a church and as Americans, to really begin to reflect on what is the human cost of war. We look at the casualties lost in war, and but I don't think that we've paid enough attention. Obviously, we've not paid enough attention with the statistics that's come out. So we want to talk about some of the causes of that we've come across. And one of the things that in the research, one of the main causes, and these are causes I think we can address. These are things that, we're not in the military, so there's certain things we cannot address, but these are things we can directly change. And one of them is, since Vietnam, and particularly also in the conflicts that we've called the global war on terror in Afghanistan and the Middle East, what has happened is either a diminishing approval rating, which was true for both of the wars, but then a diminishing interest in the American public. And so this is really one of the contributing factors to this.
Yeah, and I think our veterans are coming back to a country from active duty that is struggling with that. I've heard as high as 75% of our fellow Americans, approve of our government pulling out or pulling back our soldiers from Afghanistan, the Middle East, from various parts of the world, which is fine. But then as a veteran, how does that play on your psyche, on your thought process when you've actively given of yourself for your country to come back to a country that is, disinterested in what you're doing? You're unseen again when you return off of active duty and you try to engage or integrate back into society. That's extremely challenging for our veterans.
It's true, and I was looking at the statistics, like in the diminishing approval rate. We go back to Vietnam because really Vietnam was a paradigm shift, and so a lot of the things that we're facing in this prolonged war has lasted 20 years. World War II lasted 6 years. The Korean War lasted 3 years. It's lasted twice as long as the Vietnam War. And so there's war fatigue, I think. There's a lot of things that are entering into that. But what happened for instance, for the Vietnam War, it started in 1965. The approval rate for involvement was 60%. By 1973, when we were beginning to pull out from there, and the war was obviously, our presence over there was ending, 29%. So it was cut in half by the end of it. The war on terror, 2003, 71% per approval rate. 2018, 43% approval rate. So the length of these wars too, and and then we have to think over time then what the toll that takes, not only on the country, but also on those that are serving. And then there's related stereotypes. And I think one of the things, I remember this, I was young, but I remember I was in high school, and I remember vividly on the television seeing planes land in America. And I remember vividly seeing service members getting off the planes, and then they would show the crowds greeting them, and many of them held up signs like baby killers, and they were shouting disapproval. And so here you are fighting for your country. Here you are fighting for your cause, and you come home to realize that many people not only were indifferent to it, but that many people were increasingly opposed to the war, and then they absorbed the shock of that. And then there's a survey that came out in the election in 2018, and this is for the global war on terror. It's the indifference and ignorance, really, that's encountered by these troops coming back, because in 2018 survey, 42% of the voters were either unaware of the ongoing conflict, or they believed that the war on terror was over. And so
almost half.
Yeah, so almost half. And so then that plays a big role in the adjustment period. And then you're fighting for a significant cause that you come home and realize the very people you're fighting for are ignorant of what's going on or indifferent.
Well, let's kind of use that to lead into the idea as well of moral injury.
Mm-hmm.
I know that is a huge, significant factor also in integrating,
yes,
back into our culture. Of course, we've been talking about the after effects of returning,
mm-hmm,
but so often when our military personnel are actively engaged, they're faced with some ethical decisions
mm-hmm,
in their own personal lives that are
mm-hmm,
challenging to them, and often create this
yes,
this idea of moral injury.
right.
And so
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about that, because that's a huge factor in trying to help our
Yes.
veterans when they return work through some of that.
Just as the increasing suicide rate among veterans and military active service members, just as that's kind of the unseen casualties of war, moral injury has been the unseen cause that's been lying behind a lot of this. And one of the things, again, I come back to is that as Americans, we need to reflect on the damage, the injury that is done to our veterans and to our service members by participating in war. And so the forefront of research now among psychiatrists and those that are dealing with this issue is this topic of moral injury, and it's been the most neglected one. And it's the military culture and preparedness for war diminishes that, because you're preparing people to engage in battle and to kill other people, and so there's a real dynamic that's happening here, and so moral injury, though, it's a result of trauma that shakes the foundation of one's sense of moral goodness. I mean, it goes to the very core of who you are as a moral person and what you think is right and wrong. And and in our subsequent episodes, we're going to hear more from the experts on this aspect of moral injury. And though all the service members come home and they have other psychological and physical injuries, moral injury is now being treated as a trauma, as real as a flesh wound. And that's been one of the big shifts, is not just and with the length of the war, what they've done is, and with the advancements in medicine, they've been able to treat serious injuries and other injuries so effectively that they could redeploy. And so that was what was happening. So we get them all patched up, we get them back on their feet, we don't address any of the other issues, and then they redeploy. And so this moral injury can continue to mount from deployment to deployment.
That's such a great observation, because I think sometimes we only focus on the physical wounds.
Yes.
Obviously with the advancement of IEDs and those explosive devices that create all kinds of physical wounds, or TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
All of that, as you look at physically.
Yes.
But what about moral injury? What about psychologically? What about emotionally? What about mentally? And those are the types of issues, not just the physical wounds that our veterans are dealing with when they come back. You just can't patch that up. You have to take time to really walk with them through some of those issues.
No advancement in medicine and no advancement in technology is going to be able to deal with that. And again, in our upcoming episodes, we'll be talking to Chaplain El Fadili, and she talks about the importance of listening and one-on-one contact, and how important to see each individual service member as that, precisely as that. And so what we see is that their anxiety plays into this, depression plays into it, sleeplessness plays into a lot of it. But those things are present also with PTSD. But the things that are unique to this, and this is important for us to kind of pay attention to this, to kind of see where moral injury may be an issue, is the journalist and author David Wood has explained sorrow, remorse, grief, shame, bitterness, and moral confusion. What is right? What is wrong? He says that signals moral injury. PTSD is more like flashbacks and loss of memory, fear, and the startle complex and the things that are associated with that. Yeah. But these other things, I just wanted to say that again: sorrow, excessive sorrow or remorse, grief, shame, bitterness, and moral confusion. And we need to be aware of that, because this is really the wound that the church is best equipped to deal with. And we're not professionals when it comes to psychology or psychiatry, but we sure are professionals as pastors and as leaders when it comes to pastoral counseling. And so it can be effective there. So we want to bring the awareness to that. Amen.
Yeah, and of course, Jesus is still the answer, and being able to introduce Christ into the everyday life of our veterans is critical. And I know we've been talking about causes and symptoms and challenges, but let's kind of conclude our podcast, Steve, by talking about ways we can help, connecting our veterans to resources that may be able to help for our listening audience or viewing audience today. If you are serving in the military or have served in the military, and we have men and women who have served here in America and all over the world. There are so many around us. There are some great resources to help you. I know the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available at 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-TALK, or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. That's obviously something that is accessible to those who are really struggling right now with issues, and you need to talk to someone. What are some other resources to help our veterans?
And the hotline is for everyone, and we realize that suicide is not just a problem with our military.
Yes.
And so, but that resource is available to our military personnel and veterans. The other thing is the VA itself has a suicide prevention resources, and you can access that online at starttheconversation.veterans.crisis.net/toolkit, and we'll have that noted for in our notes. But again, it's starttheconversation.veteranscrisisline.net/toolkit. And that's a particular resource for our veterans. There's a number of veterans there. And I think for us too, one thing I just want to say here too is important warning signs. And so I just wanted to make sure today that we're becoming aware of this. But if you know a veteran and they unexpectedly give away their prized possessions, for instance, for no apparent reason, that's not necessarily an indicator, but it could be an indicator, especially in the light of these others. Survivor's guilt, if someone talks about or can't talk about the event, or they express guilt or remorse. This is clearly moral injury. And then they have depression, anxiety disorders, isolation and withdrawal, if they begin to really isolate and withdrawal, and then alcohol abuse and dependence. A conglomerate of those can be an indicator to at least reach out to that individual and do, for a deeper assessment to kind of see. So,
and I believe that each one of us, Steve, can be a resource as well and a support to our veterans. Of course, there are ways to connect with the VA and to offer missions of mercy individually in prayer and care for our veterans. But also there are just some practical ways that we can help if we're observant, if we're watching, looking, walking up to a veteran and shaking his or her hand and saying thank you for serving our country and thank you for serving us, or buying a coffee, picking up the check from a veteran who's eating somewhere in a restaurant or having coffee, and just paying for that expresses a grateful heart. And there's so many ways, or just, being someone to reach out to family members of a veteran as well. And,
that's right.
And all those kinds of things, from offering support and food and words of encouragement. We can do that.
We can do that.
And the community of faith must lead the way in that. The Pentecostal Church of God must be sensitive to that.
Yeah, and we're positioned. We have a strong chaplaincy, which we're going to talk about in the next couple of episodes. And so my thing is, be informed and get involved. Make a difference. The other day we were at a restaurant. You were talking about this. The other day I was at this restaurant in a rural area where I'm at, and went in there, and there was two veterans that were sitting at the table. And so one of them was talking about something. I don't know. There was some difficulty with the VA, or he was experiencing some difficulty. And so he actually made this remark as he was turning away from the counter where he paid. He said this: yes, with all this going on, it's no wonder that veterans commit suicide. That's what he actually said. And so there you go. There's an opportunity there, to speak to them, encounter, and that's what we need to do, is be aware and then get involved.
Well, we can't remain silent.
Right.
We have to lift up our voice. And I appreciate you mentioning the Pentecostal Church of God chaplaincy. We have a strong military and civilian chaplaincy program. And for those who might be interested in the chaplaincy, we'd love to connect with you and see if there is engagement toward that. But it's, I guess it's a mission that's possible.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Praise God. I was telling you the story, when I was growing up, we watched Mission Impossible. This was the original TV series. This isn't Tom Cruise. This is Peter Graves. And if you don't know who that is, Google it. But every episode would begin like this. Peter Graves, who was the leader of this elite team, would be he would have it was a reel to reel. Oh man.
I remember.
I remember that. And so it was like, it would start, this is your mission if you choose to accept it. And then they would begin to explain the mission. And then it's like, this tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds, and they would show that it happened. And I thought, that's really, I think, what the Lord is saying to us. He's presenting us with what we might think is a mission impossible. But I think he's clearly saying, hey, this is your mission. This is a key part of your mission. And if you choose to accept it. And so we need to choose to accept this mission, because to us, it may be impossible. With God, nothing's impossible. And so we've got to see that whatever issue we're facing, that through him, we're more than able to effectively make a difference in so many different ways. And pray for our chaplains and be aware of those on the front lines. Yes.
That's great. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us today. All of those who are coming to One Mission, One Movement podcast to hear about the prevalent issues of the day. We appreciate it, and we'll keep keep raising the awareness of
Yes.
our unseen casualties of war.
Yeah.
We always like to close our
Yes.
podcast in a certain way. And so, Steve, let's let it roll. Are you
Okay,
ready?
I'm ready.
One mission, one movement, all to Him.
Thank you for listening to the One Mission, One Movement podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Pentecostal Church of God, which is a body of believers in nearly 70 nations around the world. So we certainly invite you to join the movement by visiting our website at pcg.org. But more importantly, we want to inspire you to pursue God's presence, contend for mission, and grow the church. So if you liked today's episode and you're excited about more to come, we'll be dropping new episodes bi-monthly. So be sure to like, share, and click the subscribe button for more updates. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.